That day, I stepped into the grand hall of the plaza, where the chandeliers sparkled like stars. The faint strains of a violin mingled with the lively chatter of New York's financial elite. Powerful faces, expensive suits, and polished smiles that masked calculated intentions. Today was my father's retirement party. Parker Prescott, chairman of Prescott Holdings, the man who built a financial empire from nothing. Or so the story he always told went. I, Ezekiel Prescott, 35 years old, the youngest son and chief human resources officer of the company, stood amidst the crowd with a heavy heart, as if I were walking into a trial where no one had told me what I was being accused of. I adjusted my tie, forcing a polite smile as a few colleagues nodded in greeting. They looked at me with mixed expressions, some curiosity, some pity, and a hint of something like detachment. 13 years of dedication to Prescott Holdings. I had overhauled the HR system, retained hundreds of talents through crises, and stabilized the company when everything seemed on the verge of collapse. I didn't do it for money or to vie for power. I did it for honor, to earn my father's notice and recognition just once, with the same proud look he gave my older brother, Christopher. But deep down, I knew that hope was as fragile as a spider's web in the wind. The hall glowed with light. Tables were draped in white silk, wine glasses shimmered, and on the stage stood my father, Parker Prescott, 65 years old, like a king. He wore a perfectly tailored silver-gray suit, his voice resonant with authority. He raised his glass, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, and I felt my heart beat faster, as if waiting for something. A nod, an acknowledgement, anything to show that my years of sweat and dedication weren't meaningless. Ladies and gentlemen, my father's voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs in the room. Today is a special day. After nearly 4 decades of leading Prescott Holdings, I have decided to retire. This is a moment to reflect on what we've achieved and to look toward the future. The applause erupted. I stood at the back of the room near a wall draped with red velvet curtains, feeling as though I were being pushed out of the center of my own family. I looked at my father, hoping he'd mention me, even if just a brief sentence. But then he continued, his voice sharp as a blade. All assets, control, and the legacy of Prescott Holdings will be passed to my eldest son, Christopher Prescott. The room exploded. Applause thundered, mixed with congratulatory remarks. Christopher, 38, strode onto the stage with the confident air of someone born to lead. My older brother, with his perfect smile and sleek black suit, accepted a tight embrace from our father. They stood there under the stage lights like a flawless portrait of success and power. My chest tightened, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. But I stood still, kept smiling, kept clapping, though my hands trembled. Then my father returned to the microphone, his gaze sweeping the crowd, and I felt it. The moment I knew everything was about to shatter. His voice was cold as steel, each word a dagger to my heart. As for my younger son, Ezekiel, he paused as if my name were something bitter on his tongue. He is the greatest mistake of my life. If he had never been born, perhaps this family would not have suffered so much loss. The room fell deathly silent. The applause stopped, leaving only the faint clicks of cameras from the press corner. I stood there, feeling the floor beneath me collapse. My face burned, then turned ice cold. I wanted to shout, to rush the stage and demand why he could say those words in front of hundreds of people, in front of the world. But I couldn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor, and my heart, it was as if it had stopped beating. All eyes turned to me. Some looked with pity, as if I were a stray dog abandoned on the roadside. Others smirked, their discreet but razor-sharp smiles cutting deep. Colleagues I had worked with, shared sleepless nights with to save the company, now avoided my gaze, as if looking at me too long would taint them with the failure my father had just branded me with. I heard whispers, words brushing past like a cold breeze. It's hard to understand. Ezekiel did so much for the company. Why would he say that about his own son? But no one dared speak loudly. No one dared stand up. And I just stood there, my heart empty, as if everything I had built over 13 years had been erased by a single sentence. I wanted to run, to leave this place, but then a voice cut through the stifling silence. "Mr. Parker!" The voice was sharp, filled with outrage, and I immediately recognized it as Natalie's. My wife. She stood up from the middle of the audience, her eyes blazing like fire. "You cannot speak about my husband like that." Ezekiel has dedicated 13 years to Prescott Holdings, revamping systems, retaining talent, stabilizing the company through countless crises. You owe him recognition, and he deserves his share of the inheritance. The room buzzed again. A few people nodded as if admiring Natalie's courage. But I saw the looks in others' eyes, skeptical, cold, especially when she emphasized inheritance. I knew Natalie loved me, but I also knew she always craved the stability and security that money brought. In that moment, I wasn't sure if she was standing up for me or for something else. Still, for a fleeting second, I felt a small comfort, as if there was still someone in this world willing to fight for me. My father on the stage gripped his wine glass tightly. His face reddened with anger, but his voice remained chillingly calm. "My dear daughter-in-law, you're interrupting my event. I suggest you leave immediately." He signaled to security, and two men in black suits approached Natalie. She looked at them, then at me, her eyes both defiant and pained. "Ezekiel, are you just going to stand there and let them treat us like this?" she said, her voice trembling. I wanted to say something, to pull her back, but I just stood there, frozen, my mind swirling with 1,000 emotions, shame, humiliation, and a flicker of gratitude that she had spoken for me. Natalie lifted her chin and walked out of the row, not letting the security guards touch her. "Let's go, Ezekiel," she said firmly. I followed her silently, feeling the weight of every stare like arrows piercing my back. We walked out to the parking lot, not saying a word. The cold New York night air whipped across my face, but it wasn't as cold as the pain gnawing at my chest. We reached the parking lot in silence. The frigid New York night wind stung my face, but it paled in comparison to the pain eating away at my chest. I opened the car door for Natalie, and she slid in, her gaze fixed on the window, her hands clutching her purse as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and we drove off in silence. Every time I opened my mouth, my throat felt dry, as if every word had been swallowed by my father's humiliating remarks. Natalie said nothing either. She sat there motionless, her eyes distant, as if she were somewhere I couldn't reach. The drive from the plaza to our apartment had never felt so long. With each passing second, the silence between us grew heavier, like an invisible wall rising, separating us forever. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to focus on the road, but my mind was flooded with images of my father on the stage, his cold voice and Natalie's eyes filled with anger, disappointment, and pain. Returning to our apartment on the 12th floor, a place that once felt like a sanctuary filled with evenings of laughter, weekend breakfasts with coffee and sunlight streaming through the curtains. But as I opened the door, the space now felt cold, as if all warmth had been drained the moment we left the plaza. Natalie walked in, tossing her purse onto the sofa with more force than usual. She didn't look at me, just stood there with her back turned, her brown hair cascading down, hiding the face I once thought was my entire world. "I can't believe you, Ezekiel," she said, her voice laced with reproach but trembling, as if she were holding back a storm. "You stood there letting your father humiliate you in front of the whole world, and you didn't say a single word. Not one." I closed the door, trying to keep my voice calm, though my heart pounded. "Natalie, you know I'm not the kind of person who yells or argues in front of a crowd. I didn't want to turn the event into a battle." She spun around, her eyes blazing like fire. "A battle? Ezekiel, you lost that fight long ago. 13 years you poured your sweat, stayed up countless nights, saved that damn company through crisis after crisis. And what did you get? Public humiliation. Your father called you the greatest mistake of his life, and you just stood there smiling like a fool." Her words cut like knives, each one hitting its mark, making me feel as though my blood was seeping out drop by drop. I stepped toward her, trying to touch her arm, but she pulled back, her eyes full of contempt. "Natalie, I did it all for honor, for family, not for money or power." She let out a bitter, icy laugh, as if I'd just said the most foolish thing in the world. Honor? Family? You think that family cares about you? Your father chose Christopher, Ezekiel. Your brother, who never had to work hard for anything, was handed the world. And you? You're the discarded son. No power, no inheritance, no future. You're a failure. The word failure rang like a bell, making my head buzz. I looked at Natalie, the woman I'd loved since our days as interns at the company, who laughed with me through long work nights, who once said she'd stand by me no matter what. But now her eyes held no trace of tenderness, only disappointment and anger. I took a deep breath, trying not to crumble. Natalie, why would you say that? Back at the event, you stood up for me. You demanded my father acknowledge what I've done. If you think I'm a failure, why did you do that? She looked at me, her lips pressed tightly together, then gave a faint, mocking smile that chilled me to the bone. You think I stood up for you? Ezekiel, I stood up for the inheritance, for the share you were supposed to have. I don't want to spend my life with a man who can't protect his wife, who doesn't even fight for himself. You let them trample you, and now we have nothing. Her words hit me like a punch to the face. I stood frozen, feeling the world collapse beneath my feet. You mean you only care about the money? I asked, my voice hoarse, as if I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. Natalie didn't answer immediately. She turned away, walked to the window, and looked down at the stream of cars below. I'm tired, Ezekiel. Tired of living in the shadow of your family, tired of waiting for you to stand up and claim what you deserve. But you can't do it. You never could, and I can't keep living with someone like that. My chest tightened, as if someone were crushing my heart. Natalie, what are you saying? What do you want from me? She turned back, her eyes no longer angry but chillingly cold. I want a divorce, Ezekiel. The word divorce exploded in my mind like thunder. I stared at her, hoping it was just something said in the heat of the moment, but her gaze didn't waver. Are you serious? I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. Dead serious, she replied, her tone flat, as if she'd been thinking about this for a long time. I can't keep living with someone who has nothing to protect himself. Nothing to protect us. You chose honor, but honor doesn't pay the bills, doesn't give me a future. I'm done. I wanted to ask her how she could change so quickly, how the love we once shared could vanish because of one event, because of my father's words. But I just stood there, motionless, watching her walk into the bedroom. The sound of her suitcase dragging across the wooden floor echoed like the rhythm of a funeral dirge. She packed her clothes, the dresses I'd bought her, the items we'd picked out together in happier days. Each zip of the suitcase was a cut to my heart. Natalie, can we talk more about this? I tried, my voice hoarse. We've been through so much together. You can't just leave like this. She paused, her hand still gripping the suitcase, but she didn't turn to look at me. There's nothing left to say, Ezekiel. You chose your path. I have to choose mine. She pulled the suitcase to the door, the wheels rolling across the floor like a final goodbye. The door slammed shut, and I stood there in the empty apartment that was once our home. The city lights outside filtered in, but they weren't enough to dispel the darkness enveloping me. I sank onto the sofa, looking around the room. The dining table where we used to laugh, the bookshelf where Natalie kept her favorite novels, the kitchen corner where she used to hum softly while cooking. All of it now just fragments of a shattered dream. I don't know how long I sat there, only that when the first light of dawn crept through the window, the apartment remained as silent as a tomb. I picked up my phone, hoping to see a message from Natalie, an apology, a sign that she regretted her decision. But there was nothing, only emptiness. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived at the apartment. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing an official divorce petition from Natalie's lawyer. Attached was a demand for asset division. She wanted half of everything we had, though most of my assets were just modest savings in this apartment. I read every line, every word, but felt no anger. Only a deep emptiness, as if the last piece of my life had crumbled the night Natalie left. I folded the document, placed it on the table, and looked out the window. New York City kept moving, kept buzzing, kept living. But I, Ezekiel Prescott, the man who once thought he could change the world with integrity, was left with nothing but an empty apartment and a broken heart. In the days following Natalie's departure, I lived like a ghost, drifting silently through the small Brooklyn apartment where the city's noise only deepened my loneliness. The media hadn't let go of the Prescott family. Articles, social media posts, and whispers in financial circles relentlessly dug into the events of my father's retirement party. Youngest son publicly humiliated. Parker Prescott disowns Ezekiel over past mistakes. The headlines sliced into my pride like daggers. I turned off my phone, drew the curtains, and tried to make myself invisible. But the truth was, no one can escape themselves. One afternoon, as the sunset bathed the apartment's peeling walls in golden light, the doorbell rang. I hesitated, assuming it was a persistent reporter or a misdelivered package. But when I opened the door, there stood my uncle, River Prescott, my father's younger brother, calm but with a resolute glint in his eyes. At 58, he still carried the sharp demeanor of a family lawyer, dressed in a simple yet sophisticated gray suit. In his hand was a brown envelope, carefully sealed, as if it held a secret capable of shaking the world. "Ezekiel," he said, his voice low but warm, "do you have time to talk?" I nodded, inviting him in, though my heart was heavy with suspicion. Uncle River had always been the quiet one in the family, the one who handled Prescott Holdings' legal messes behind the scenes without ever seeking the spotlight. I poured 2 cups of coffee, set them on the small table in the living room, and we sat across from each other. My apartment, with its modest furniture and worn-out sofa, seemed too small for his presence. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart pounded as if it knew something momentous was about to happen. Uncle River didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the envelope on the table and slid it toward me. "This is something your grandfather, William Prescott, left behind. He instructed me to give it to you when the time was right." I stared at the envelope, my heart sinking. My name, Ezekiel Prescott, was written in my grandfather's firm, familiar handwriting, the man who had been the only light in my grim childhood. "What time?" I asked, my voice hoarse, as if afraid of the answer. Uncle River met my eyes, his gaze sharp but not without empathy. "When you were stripped of your inheritance or treated unjustly by your own family." His words hit me like a blow to the chest. My breath caught as if the air in the room had suddenly thinned. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope, careful as if it might disintegrate if I weren't gentle enough. Inside was a supplemental will neatly folded along with a handwritten letter. I opened the letter first, and from the very first line my grandfather's voice echoed in my mind, clear, warm, but tinged with pain. "Dear Ezekiel," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means our family has strayed too far from the values I tried to uphold. I foresaw this day when power and prestige would blind your father, Parker. He is a strong man, but that strength has turned into tyranny. I feared that Prescott Holdings, the legacy I built with faith in humanity, would lose its compassion." I paused, my eyes blurring as the words grew hazy. My grandfather, who taught me that a true leader values every life, had seen it all. My father's favoritism, how he pushed me to the margins, and how he placed power above everything. I continued reading, each word hammering at my heart. "You are the only one I trust to protect the true legacy of our family. Not because of talent or ambition, but because you live with integrity and kindness. Don't let your goodness become a weakness. Stand up, Ezekiel, not for power, but for the honor I've placed in you." I folded the letter, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold it. Inside the envelope was the supplemental will, bearing my grandfather's signature and those of 2 witnesses, notarized at Uncle River's private law office. The document was legally binding, indisputable. It declared that if I were stripped of my inheritance or treated unjustly, all shares and control of Prescott Holdings would belong to me. Not Christopher, not my father, but me, Ezekiel Prescott, the discarded son. I looked at Uncle River, my mind reeling. "How long have you had this?" I asked, my voice catching. "Nearly 10 years, he replied, his eyes darkening. "Your grandfather entrusted it to me before he passed. He instructed me to open it only when Parker proved unworthy of the family's legacy. I've been waiting, Ezekiel. Waiting for the day you were publicly humiliated before the world. This is the moment your grandfather anticipated, the moment for the most worthy to rise and reclaim the Prescott name's honor." I sat there, stunned, unsure whether to feel joy or pain. My grandfather's faith was the only light in the darkness surrounding me, but it was also a burden. To be recognized, I had to endure humiliation, loss, and loneliness. Natalie had left me. My father had called me a mistake. And now I held in my hands something that could change everything, but could also destroy what little remained of my family. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Uncle River placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze steadfast. "You have to decide, Ezekiel. But remember, this isn't a fight for power. It's a fight for honor. The honor your grandfather entrusted to you." I stared out the window as the sunset faded completely, giving way to darkness creeping through the glass. The brown envelope lay on the table next to the cold coffee Uncle River had left behind. I picked up my grandfather's letter, my fingers tracing the firm, familiar handwriting, as if it could transport me back to the days when I believed I belonged to the Prescott family. I opened the letter again, and instantly memories flooded back like a torrent, pulling me back to my childhood in the Prescott mansion, where I was nothing but a shadow, invisible and forgotten. I remembered those days, a scrawny boy quietly navigating the vast hallways of the Prescott estate, where antique paintings and crystal chandeliers told the story of the family's wealth. My father, Parker Prescott, was as cold as the marble walls encircling the house. He never praised me, not once. I could spend all day solving the toughest math problems, bring home an A+ from school, or even craft a model airplane by hand as a birthday gift for him. But all I ever got was a curt nod or a clipped "good," as if my existence was a burden he had to endure. In contrast, my older brother Christopher was always the center of attention. He had his own room in the east wing of the mansion, with an intricately carved walnut bed, a bookshelf filled with expensive leather-bound books, and a window overlooking the meticulously tended garden. Christopher was chauffeured to the city's most prestigious private school, while I squeezed onto a public bus with a worn-out backpack and scuffed shoes. I wasn't jealous of my brother, not exactly. I just wanted my father to look at me just once, the way he looked at Christopher, with pride, as if I too were part of this family. Family dinners were the clearest proof of that favoritism. The long mahogany table, draped in white silk, was set with elaborate dishes I barely dared touch, afraid of spilling something or upsetting my father. He sat at the head of the table, his voice deep and commanding, talking only to Christopher about the company, the future of Prescott Holdings, and the grand plans my brother would inherit. "Christopher, you need to learn to read financial reports sooner," he'd say, his eyes lighting up as my brother nodded, a confident smile playing on his lips. I sat at the far end of the table, quietly eating my portion, careful not to let my spoon clink too loudly against the plate, knowing even a small noise could draw my father's sharp glare. I tried. I really tried. I studied day and night, brought home perfect report cards, joined every academic competition the school offered just to earn a sliver of my father's pride. But every time I showed him my grades, he'd glance at them and nod, saying, "Just luck," or worse, "Don't think this impresses me." I didn't understand why. I couldn't fathom why I was pushed to the margins, why I was the spare in my own family. Then I learned the reason, on a frigid night when I overheard my father talking to a business partner in his study. "Ezekiel is bad luck," he said, his voice low. "His mother died right after giving birth to him. Not long after, I nearly lost my life in a car accident. If he hadn't been born, things might have been different." Those words pierced my heart like a blade, leaving a trembling 10-year-old boy shivering behind the door. From that moment, I understood that my father didn't just not love me. He resented me, as if my existence was a curse. But in the darkness of that childhood, there was one light. My grandfather, William Prescott. He was the only one who saw me as a person, not a mistake. He often took me to the old farm on the outskirts of Westchester, far from the cold marble walls and my father's judgmental eyes. There, amidst fields of grass and birdsong, he taught me lessons I carried with me for life. "Ezekiel," he said, sitting on a wooden bench under an oak tree, "a true leader isn't the one with the most money or power. It's the one who values the smallest things, from the lowest employee to the smallest client." I sat beside him listening, feeling for the first time in my life that I was seen, heard, and loved. My grandfather told me about the early days of Prescott Holdings, how he built the company not just for profit but out of a belief in creating a place where people were treated fairly. He taught me how to care for plants, how to listen to the wind, and how to stand firm against storms, not the ones in the sky, but the ones in the heart. "You have a good heart, Ezekiel," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let the world harden it." Now, sitting in my dim Brooklyn apartment, I reread my grandfather's letter, each line like a heartbeat pulling me back to those days. "You are the only one I trust to protect the true legacy of our family. Not because of talent or ambition, but because you live with integrity and kindness." My eyes stung, not from sadness but from emotion. My grandfather had seen what my father never could. My worth didn't lie in money or power, but in the heart he had so carefully nurtured. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest as if to hold on to the last of his warmth. Despite being rejected since childhood, despite my father calling me a mistake, despite the world turning its back on me, I still had my grandfather's love and faith, the most precious legacy I'd ever had. But the storm in my heart hadn't subsided. This trust, was a light, but also a burden. I knew that to protect my grandfather's legacy, I would have to confront my father, my brother, and even myself. After days of reflection, I made my decision. Not for revenge, not to seize power. I wanted to give my father and brother one last chance, to salvage the family's honor before the truth in my grandfather's will was revealed. I carried a copy of his letter carefully folded in my suit jacket pocket, like a talisman. Standing before the towering iron gates of the Prescott estate, with its perfectly manicured gardens, my heart pounded as if I were a 10-year-old boy again, bracing for my father's judgment. The heavy iron gate swung open and I stepped into the main hall, where the crystal chandelier still sparkled as it had in my childhood memories. The butler, an old man who had served the family since before I was born, greeted me with a sympathetic nod. "Master Ezekiel, it's been a long time," he said softly. I offered a faint smile but didn't respond, following him into the grand living room where my father and brother awaited. My father, Parker Prescott, sat in a leather armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, his gaze sharp and cold. He wore a crisp white shirt, no tie, yet still exuded the commanding presence of a man who had once controlled an empire. Christopher stood by the window looking out at the garden, his posture confident as always, though I noticed a slight tension in the way he clasped his hands behind his back. Both turned to look at me as I entered, and the air in the room immediately grew stifling, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. "Ezekiel," my father said, his voice low but laced with irritation, "I didn't expect you to dare show your face here after that fiasco at the party. What do you want? The inheritance you think you deserve?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, though my chest burned. "I'm not here to demand anything, Father. I'm here to talk, to give you and Christopher a chance to save the family's honor before things go too far." Christopher let out a sharp, scornful laugh. He turned, his eyes glinting with mockery. "Honor? Ezekiel, you really think you have any right to talk about honor? You're just a failure clinging to sentimental stories to beg for pity. Don't waste our time." His words stung like a whip, but I didn't let them shake me. I pulled the copy of my grandfather's letter from my pocket and placed it on the mahogany table in the center of the room, my voice calm, but resolute. This is a letter from grandfather William Prescott. He wrote it before he died, along with a supplemental will. He knew you'd been blinded by power and prestige, Father. He feared Prescott Holdings would lose the core values he built it on: transparency, humanity, fairness. He believed I was the only one who could protect that legacy. My father's brow furrowed, his eyes flicking to the paper without touching it. A will? A letter? You think I'd believe this nonsense? His voice was sharp, the whiskey glass in his hand trembling slightly, making the amber liquid ripple. William was my father, and I know what he wanted. Prescott Holdings is mine, and now it's Christopher's. You have no place in that will, Ezekiel. My chest tightened, but I pressed on, my voice beginning to quiver with emotion. Father, I don't want to fight. I just want us to look at what Prescott Holdings is losing. This company isn't just about money or power. It's grandfather's legacy, built on integrity and faith in people. We can restore it together, make it what he dreamed it could be. Christopher stepped forward, his voice cutting. You're delusional, Ezekiel. A flimsy letter changes nothing. You think you can waltz in here waving some papers and make us beg for your forgiveness? You're pathetic. His words poured fuel on the fire inside me, but I held back, taking a deep breath. Christopher, I don't want to fight. I just want us to do the right thing together. But if you and Father aren't willing, I'll have to do what's necessary to protect grandfather's legacy. My father went silent for a moment, his eyes boring into me, searching for any sign of weakness. Then he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. The world only respects the strong, Ezekiel. You've never understood that. You want honor, you want a legacy. Earn it yourself, instead of clinging to the empty words of a dead old man. I stood there, feeling the floor beneath me crumble. I looked at my father, at my brother, and realized they had gone too far to see the values my grandfather cherished. I said nothing more. I left the copy of the will on the table, the fragile paper sitting in the heavy silence of the room. I gave you and Christopher a chance, I said, my voice hoarse. I hope one day you'll understand. As I walked out of the Prescott estate, the cold New York wind wrapped around me, but in my heart I felt a strange sense of peace. I had done what my grandfather William would have been proud of. I gave my father and brother a chance to talk, to save the family's honor. But as the heavy iron gate clanged shut behind me, I knew they had thrown that chance away without a second thought. My father, Parker, and my brother, Christopher, had no intention of facing the truth, and now I steeled myself for what was to come, a storm I knew would not be easy to weather. In the days that followed, the air in New York felt heavier than ever. I returned to my small Brooklyn apartment, where the city's lights only accentuated my loneliness. I tried to keep myself busy, reviewing my grandfather's will, rereading his letter like a talisman. But the world outside refused to let me be. Rumors began to spread, smoldering like small flames fanned into a blaze by my own family. I received a call from an old friend who had worked with me at Prescott Holdings. Ezekiel, do you know what's going on? His voice was urgent, almost panicked. They're saying you fabricated a will to claim the inheritance. They're saying you were fired for incompetence. You need to speak up, do something. I sank onto the sofa, gripping the phone tightly, feeling my blood boil. Who's saying this? I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Christopher, and your father. They're holding a press conference. You should turn on the TV. I switched on the television, and immediately Christopher's face appeared on the screen, standing in a luxurious press room with the Prescott Holdings logo behind him. He wore a sleek black suit, his usual confident smile in place, but his eyes were cold and calculating. We regret having to make this public, Christopher said, his voice measured yet theatrical. But Ezekiel Prescott, my brother, has deliberately spread false information about a forged will, aiming to sow confusion among investors and damage the Prescott family's honor. We have filed a lawsuit against him for defamation and reputational harm. The press room buzzed. Reporters scrambled to ask questions, cameras flashing like lightning. My chest tightened, as if the air in the apartment had been sucked dry. My father appeared beside Christopher, his presence commanding but his face as cold as ice. "Prescott Holdings is my legacy," he said, his voice resonant. "I won't let anyone, not even my own son, destroy what I've built." I turned off the TV, unable to bear another second. They hadn't just rejected the truth, they had turned against me, painting me as the enemy before the entire world. I opened my phone, scrolling through social media where every post felt like a dagger to my pride. "Ezekiel Prescott fired for incompetence," one headline screamed. "Youngest Prescott son greedy fabricates will to seize inheritance," a viral post claimed. Even former colleagues, people I had worked alongside, shared sleepless nights with to save the company, now publicly criticized me. "Ungrateful," they wrote, "greedy, a failure clinging to fading glory." I sat there in the dim apartment, feeling as though the entire world had turned its back on me. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, reporters, and strangers eager to dig into the drama. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word, every act of defiance now would only fuel the fire my father and brother had ignited. I knew the more I argued, the more ammunition they'd have to tarnish my credibility. Then the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Uncle River stood there, his gaze resolute but tinged with concern. He stepped inside and placed a thick briefcase on the table. "Ezekiel," he said, his voice low but firm, "we need to prepare. Parker and Christopher have hired the company's best legal team. They're accusing you of defamation, and they'll do everything to destroy you in court." I looked at the briefcase, my heart pounding. "Are you sure the will is real?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "If they prove I fabricated it..." Uncle River placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes sharp as steel. "The will is real, Ezekiel. I've kept it for over 10 years, with William's signature and 2 witnesses notarized at my private law office. They can't deny its legitimacy. But you need to be strong. This isn't just a legal battle, it's a media war, and they're playing dirty." I nodded, feeling an invisible weight settle on my shoulders. Uncle River opened the briefcase, showing me the documents related to the will, the original notarized copies and verification records from his law office. "I'm on your side," he said, "but you need to choose how to fight. Respond to the media or stay silent." I looked out the window, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. "I'll stay silent," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. "Not because I'm afraid, but because I know the truth will speak for itself. If I argue now, they'll have more chances to twist everything. I'll focus on the evidence." Uncle River nodded, a glint of pride in his eyes. "You're more like William than you realize," he said, then left, leaving me with the briefcase and a storm of emotions. I sat down, turned on the TV again, and saw my image being dragged through the mud on every channel. But I didn't crumble. I picked up my grandfather's letter, reading each line again, and felt a small flame ignite in my chest. This wasn't the time to be weak. This was the time to fight, not with words, but with the truth. One morning, as faint sunlight filtered through the curtains, Uncle River called. His voice was low but resolute. "Ezekiel, I've arranged a family meeting at the Prescott estate. Parker has agreed to hold it under the guise of addressing your slander. But this is our chance. I've prepared everything, the legal documents, witnesses, and the original will. Are you ready?" I gripped the phone tightly, feeling my blood surge. "I'm ready," I replied, my voice hoarse but firm. This wasn't a fight for power or money. This was a fight for honor. My grandfather's, mine, and the legacy the Prescott family once stood for. On the day of the meeting, I stood before the Prescott estate, feeling like I was stepping back into my childhood, when I was just a trembling boy under my father's cold gaze. But today I was no longer that boy. I wore a deep blue suit, a copy of my grandfather's letter tucked in my jacket pocket, and in my heart burned a fire that could not be extinguished. The estate's grand meeting room was set up like a courtroom. A polished mahogany table stretched across the space, surrounded by luxurious leather chairs, with the crystal chandelier casting a cold light. My father, Parker Prescott, sat at the head of the table exuding the authority of a king, though I noticed the tension in how he gripped his whiskey glass. Christopher stood beside him, dressed in a sleek black suit, his eyes sharp, but betraying a flicker of unease. Around the table were a few of Prescott Holdings' major shareholders, powerful faces I'd seen in company meetings, along with my father's legal team, men in gray suits who looked at me like I was prey. Uncle River entered after me, carrying a thick briefcase, his demeanor calm. He sat across from my father, placed the briefcase on the table, and the room's atmosphere grew heavy, as if we all sensed a storm brewing. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, his voice resonant but laced with contempt. "We are here today to address the baseless accusations of Ezekiel Prescott, who has spread false information about a forged will to sow chaos in the company and tarnish the Prescott family's reputation." Christopher nodded, flashing a smug smile. "We have a top-tier legal team to prove that Ezekiel's claims are fabricated. He's merely trying to seize power he doesn't deserve." I sat there, feeling my chest tighten, but I stayed silent. I glanced at Uncle River and he gave a subtle nod, signaling that the moment had come. He stood, his voice low but commanding, resonating through the room. "Dear brother, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to present the truth." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a brown envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was the original will of my grandfather, William Prescott, complete with notarized seals and the signatures of 2 witnesses. He held it up, letting the light shine through the paper as if to show the world its undeniable truth. "This is the supplemental will of William Prescott, drafted before his death. It was verified by an independent law firm and is legally binding." The room fell silent. A few shareholders whispered among themselves, their eyes flickering between curiosity and skepticism. My father gripped his whiskey glass tighter, his face reddening, though he maintained a facade of calm. "River, what are you doing? Is this a joke?" Uncle River didn't respond. Instead, he read aloud the key provision of the will, his voice clear, each word striking like a bullet in the air. "This will takes effect if Ezekiel Prescott is unjustly stripped of his inheritance by his own family. And that happened publicly, at your retirement party, Parker, when you called Ezekiel the greatest mistake of my life in front of hundreds of guests." The whispers in the room grew louder. One shareholder, Eleanor Grayson, an older woman with piercing eyes, spoke up. "Parker, you need to explain. If this will is real, why would you treat your son this way?" Before my father could respond, Uncle River continued, unwavering. "The will clearly states all shares and the founding inheritance rights of Prescott Holdings belong to Ezekiel Prescott, the one who lives with the integrity and compassion this family needs to endure. William foresaw that you, Parker, would let power blind you. He wanted Ezekiel to protect the family's true legacy." One of my father's lawyers stood, attempting to object. "We need time to verify the authenticity of this document." But Uncle River was prepared. He presented the notarized copies, verification records, and even summoned a witness, a retired lawyer who had worked with my grandfather, who entered the room to testify. The elderly man, with white hair and a trembling voice heavy with emotion, confirmed, "I witnessed William Prescott sign this will. It is entirely legitimate." My father could no longer maintain his composure. He slammed his whiskey glass onto the floor, the amber liquid splashing out. "This is an internal conspiracy. River, you're betraying me. Ezekiel, you think you can overthrow me with a piece of paper?" Christopher, his face flushed with rage, stood abruptly. "You're a failure, Ezekiel. You think these tricks will make you a hero? You're nothing." He pointed at me, then stormed out, the door slamming behind him. I sat there, my heart pounding, but I refused to be swept up in their anger. I looked at my father, at the shareholders, and spoke, my voice quiet but resolute. "Grandfather chose the right moment for the truth to come to light. I'm not here to gloat or seek revenge. I'm here to protect what he built." The room descended into chaos. Shareholders began questioning my father's transparency and management, raising concerns about questionable financial decisions they had previously overlooked. My father tried to reassure them, but his voice faltered as if he knew he was losing control. I stood and quietly left the room, leaving the will and the truth to do their work. Just hours after the meeting, news of my grandfather's will spread like wildfire across dry grass. New York's major financial newspapers ran headlines. William Prescott's secret will turns the tide at Prescott Holdings. Ezekiel Prescott, unexpected heir or family betrayer? Social media erupted with posts, comments, and even mockery aimed at my father and brother. Shareholders, once loyal to my father, began questioning his transparency and management. Independent auditors were called in, and the barrage of calls from reporters to my Brooklyn apartment was relentless. I turned off my phone and drew the curtains, but the outside world wouldn't let me rest. The investigation's results came faster than I expected. Within weeks, audit reports exposed a litany of irregularities under my father and Christopher's leadership at Prescott Holdings. Unapproved risky investments, shady contracts with close associates, and the diversion of profits to personal accounts, all were brought to light. The company's reputation, which my father had always prided himself on, was severely damaged. Stock prices plummeted, and the board of directors, under pressure from shareholders and public opinion, was forced to act. One morning, as I was brewing coffee in my small apartment, Uncle River called. "Ezekiel?" His voice was low but carried a weight of gravity. "The board just held an emergency meeting. Parker has been forced to fully withdraw from his honorary position. Christopher has been removed as CEO. Their shares are temporarily frozen pending restructuring. They have nothing left." I gripped the coffee mug tightly, feeling my chest constrict. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, only a deep sadness, as if I were watching my family crumble before my eyes. "Is there anything else, Uncle?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Uncle River hesitated, then continued. "The board wants you to take on the role of interim CEO. They need someone to restructure the company and restore trust among employees and shareholders. You're the only one they trust right now." I sank onto the sofa, my mind reeling. CEO of Prescott Holdings, a position I had never dared dream of, not because I lacked the ability, but because I never thought I'd be recognized. Now it was no longer a dream. It was a responsibility, the one my grandfather had entrusted to me through his will. The following week, I walked into Prescott Holdings headquarters and stepped into the CEO's office, a space both foreign and familiar. The expansive room with its windows overlooking New York's skyline was once where my father sat, issuing commands and building his empire. Now it was where I would start anew, not to continue my father's ambitions, but to restore the values my grandfather held dear. I called a meeting with the management team, announcing plans for financial transparency, new governance protocols, and a commitment to listening to every employee, from the janitors to the directors. The shareholders, initially skeptical, were gradually won over by my sincerity. Employees who had once avoided my gaze at the retirement party now looked at me with newfound respect. The media began calling me the Silent Heir, a title I wasn't sure I liked. They wrote about me as a hero who saved the Prescott family's honor not through power but through integrity. To me, there was no victory to celebrate. Every step I took, every decision I made was simply my way of keeping my promise to my grandfather and Uncle River. I didn't seek revenge against my father or Christopher. I didn't need to. The truth had done that for me. Meanwhile, I heard whispers about my father and brother through the financial grapevine. My father, Parker Prescott, once the king of New York, rarely left the estate. People said he sat in his study staring at old family portraits, speaking to no one but the aging butler. Christopher faced the rejection of friends and loyal shareholders. He posted on social media trying to project strength, but the desperation in his words was evident to all. They had lost everything, not just power, but the pride they once considered untouchable. I moved out of the Brooklyn apartment, settling into a small house in the suburbs where I could hear birdsong and feel a peace the city could never offer. My new life was simple, free of extravagant parties or flashing camera lights. I worked, came home, and on late nights I sat by the window gazing at the starry sky. thinking of my father, the man who was once so proud he lost it all. I didn't hate him or hold a grudge. I only hoped that one day he would find the courage to look at himself, to see the mistakes he made, not just with me but with the entire Prescott family. In the days after I assumed the role of interim CEO of Prescott Holdings, my life settled into a new rhythm, simple yet deeply meaningful. I woke early, driving through quiet suburban roads to the company headquarters, where I worked tirelessly to restore the trust of employees and shareholders. Financial reports were made transparent, new governance protocols were established, and day by day, I felt Prescott Holdings slowly reclaiming the brilliance my grandfather William had once envisioned. Yet within me there remained a void, not from a lack of power or prestige, but from the unhealed wounds of my family. One late afternoon, as the sunset bathed the CEO's office in golden light, my assistant knocked on the door, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Prescott, someone is here to see you." She says her name is Natalie. I froze, the coffee mug in my hand trembling slightly. Natalie, the woman who had once been my entire world, who had left me on the darkest night of my life. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let her in." The door opened and Natalie stepped inside, as beautiful as ever, but something was different. Her brown hair fell loosely, her eyes shimmering with a mix of nervousness and hope. She wore a pale blue dress, a color I used to love, but now it only stirred painful memories. "Ezekiel," she said, her voice soft but trembling. I want to talk." I gestured for her to sit, though my heart pounded as if bracing for a battle I didn't want to fight. "Go ahead, Natalie," I said, my voice even masking the storm of emotions inside me. She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as if searching for courage. "I'm sorry, Ezekiel. I was wrong to leave you. I let fear and pressure control me. I want to start over. You and we had such beautiful days. I know you're the CEO now, and I realize I walked away from an incredible man like you." Her words cut like a knife, not out of pain, but because they reminded me of the night she left, when she called me a failure, when she admitted she stood up for the inheritance. I looked into her eyes, searching for sincerity, but all I saw was belated regret tinged with calculation. "Natalie," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "you were once a vital part of my life. I'm grateful for those days. But true love isn't built on money or status. I can't go back, not because I'm angry, but because I need to move forward and live true to myself." Her face paled, her eyes glistening as if on the verge of tears. "Ezekiel, can't you give me a chance? I know I was wrong. I gave you a chance," I interrupted, my voice gentle but resolute, "and you chose your path. Now I have to choose mine." She stood, her lips pressed tightly together, then quietly left the office. As the door closed, I sat down, feeling as if I'd shed a heavy burden. I didn't hate Natalie. I was only sad, but it was the sadness of letting go, of accepting that not everything in life can be mended. A few weeks later, another event caught me off guard. One morning, as I reviewed financial reports, my assistant announced that my father, Parker, and my brother, Christopher, wanted to meet. I was stunned. Since the chaotic family meeting, I'd heard nothing from them except whispers of their downfall in financial circles. I agreed to meet, but braced myself for another confrontation. They entered the office, and I barely recognized them. My father, once the proud king of Prescott Holdings, looked aged, his eyes weary as if drained of life. Christopher maintained his polished appearance, but his confident smile was gone, replaced by visible tension on his face. They stood before my desk, the air heavy with the weight of an impending storm. "Ezekiel," my father began, his voice low but lacking its former authority, "we're here to talk about the future. Christopher and I want to restore our honor. We want to work with you to manage Prescott Holdings as a family." Christopher nodded, though his eyes avoided mine. "We have experience, Ezekiel. You can't do this alone. We can help." I looked at them, feeling as if time had rewound. These were the words I had longed to hear for years from my father and brother. But now, after everything, they only filled me with a deep sadness. I didn't reject them outright. Instead, I offered a solution. "Father Christopher," I said calmly, "I don't want to push you out of the company. I propose you both serve as advisors, contributing your experience to help stabilize the company. This is a chance for us to start over, for Prescott Holdings, for grandfather." The room grew stifling. My father clenched his fists, his face reddening with anger. "Advisors? You think I need charity from my own son?" he snapped, as if I had insulted him. "I built this company from nothing, Ezekiel, and now you expect me to bow to you?" Christopher sneered, his eyes filled with contempt. "Work under you? That's humiliating. Who do you think you are, Ezekiel, a hero? You're just a lucky fool who got hold of that will and thinks he can control everything." Their words cut like knives, but I didn't let them pull me in. I stood, looking them in the eyes. "I'm not offering charity. I'm giving you a chance to contribute, to start over. But if you don't want it, I respect that decision." My father slammed his hand on the desk, his voice trembling with rage. "I don't need your pity disguised as a position. You'll regret this, Ezekiel." He turned and stormed out of the office, Christopher following, casting a resentful glance back at me. The door slammed shut, and I stood there silently, feeling as if another door to my past had closed forever. I returned to my desk, opening the company's new development plan. I didn't react or get angry. I understood that some people would rather live in ruined pride than start anew with humility. My heart was at peace, knowing I had done the right thing. I offered a chance, even if no one took it. In the months that followed, Prescott Holdings gradually stabilized. Transparent financial reports restored the confidence of employees and shareholders, and the Prescott name once again commanded respect in New York's financial circles. The media continued to call me the silent heir, but to me the title didn't matter. Every decision I made, every day I worked, was simply my way of keeping my promise to my grandfather, to protect his legacy, not through power but through integrity. But in the late nights, when I sat alone in my small suburban house with a cold cup of tea and the sound of wind rustling through the trees, I reflected on my journey. From a boy labeled bad luck, pushed to the margins by my father, to a man who stood up to reclaim the family's honor. I had weathered storms I never thought I could survive. The wounds from my father's public humiliation at the retirement party, from Natalie's departure, from my brother's betrayal lingered, but they no longer caused me pain. Instead, they became lessons, fires that forged me into the person I am today. I want to share those lessons, not to boast, but in the hope that my story might be a light for someone lost in their own darkness. Remember that integrity is the most enduring legacy. My grandfather William once told me under the oak tree at the Westchester farm that a true leader values every single life. When I took on the role of CEO, I didn't seek power or fame. I worked to restore trust, to ensure that Prescott Holdings wasn't just a money-making machine, but a place where people were respected and heard. The integrity my grandfather instilled in me became the torch lighting my path. And I know it's the most valuable legacy I can leave behind. If you're facing a storm, whether it's betrayal, humiliation, or loss, remember that you don't need to fight with anger or hatred. Fight with truth, with integrity, and with faith in yourself. Don't let criticism or rejection make you doubt your worth. Live in a way that when you look back, you can be proud that you didn't let the darkness of others extinguish the light within you.